One of the features that you might expect when performing navigation is having transition and animation between the screens when you are navigating from and to a screen. So in this video, I will show you how to perform transitions in Jetpack Compose navigation. Note that the transition APIs in Jetpack Compose navigation have not been yet implemented. Therefore, we will use the Accompanist library. But by learning the basics and principles of navigation animation in this video, you will probably be prepared for how the transition will be implemented in future version of the navigation compose library. So let's get started by adding transition to this application. Note that the current application that I have here does not have any transition between different screens. So let's run it and see how it works currently, and then I will add transition to the movement and navigation between the screens. As you can see, this application has several different screens that have been implemented using Jetpack Compose, and these screens are also integrated with the bottom navigation API in Jetpack Compose so that we can move around by clicking the items that we have in the bottom navigation. And we have home, cart, favorite, more, that in turn the more screen has email and website. By clicking email we go to another screen, and by clicking the website button we can go to a website. And as you can see, currently we don't have any specific transition when we move to a screen and when we leave the current screen. The only transition that we see, however, is a very simple fade in and fade out, so that when I click the screen, more screen for example, the current screen is slowly faded out and the new screen is faded in. This is very subtle, of course, but you can see it by being careful. It's noticeable. The current screen is faded out and the new screen is faded in. Before going on any further, I'm going to change the theme of this IDE to high contrast, because the other lessons of this section had that contrast. Therefore, to be consistent, I'm gonna perform that and change to that setting. And after that, I'm gonna turn on the presentation mode. High contrast. Looks like it already has the high contrast. Yes. Okay, now let's turn on the high contrast from the view, appearance, and enter presentation mode. I'm going to turn on the presentation mode to show the code better. And the first step to add the transition API to Jetpack Compose navigation is to add the Accompanist library for the navigation transitions. So what I do, I open the project explorer from the left and I go to build scripts, build.gradle file for the app module, of course, where I add the dependencies, and I add the Accompanist library, implementation, Android X. Sorry, it's not Android X because it's not part of the Android X. The Accompanist library has this artifact, com.google.accompanist, and then Accompanist navigation animation. And the latest version for it is 0.20 or 0.0. And to find the latest version, you can go to your browser and search for Accompanist library on GitHub, and you can find the latest version over there. Accompanist Google, GitHub. Of course, I know the direct link to it, so I go to github.com/google/accompanist. So I don't need to search for it. And the artifact we are looking for is navigation animation. So I click the link and you can see the artifact you need to add, as well as the latest version. And the repository for it is Maven Central, so make sure this is added to your list of repositories. So back to Android Studio, to my list of repositories, it's likely to be in the other build.gradle file. Yes, Maven Central is in my list of repositories for the project, so it's fine. Let's sync now and then proceed with other changes that we need to perform. To make sure that our build is successful and the sync is successful, I open View, Tool Windows, and then Build. Yes, it was successful. Next, I will follow along the to-dos that I have added to main activity, by following which I can add the support for navigation animation to my Jetpack Compose application. So I go to main activity by searching for main activity. I find it and open it. And as you can see, the first to-do is replacing Remember Nav Controller with Remember Animated Nav Controller. This is a special version of animated nav controller. This is a special version of animated. This is a special version of nav controller that has support for animation and transition. So I replaced remember nav controller with remember animated nav controller. Yes, as you can see, it's part of the Accompanist library. So I press enter and it is added. So I remove the to do after that because I have performed it, and we have an error or a warning. This is an experimental animation API. So to fix that, I'm going to add experimental animation API and annotation to this composable. So I select add experimental animation API annotation. The next step is performing to do 2 replace with animated nav host. So I'm gonna change nav host to animated nav host that has support for animation, and it is again part of the Accompanist library. So animated nav host, and we need to import it. So I import it by pressing Alt and Enter. So I remove to do. I have applied it. And the next step, step number 3, is replacing our composable that is already imported from the Jetpack Compose navigation library, and replacing it with the composable or with composable from the Accompanist library. So to make that easier, I'm going to remove this composable from the list of imports, and then it will ask me to import it from the 2 available options, from which I will choose the one that is from the Accompanist library. So let's go to our list of imports, find composable, so I don't find composable here, but instead looks like everything that is part of the compose package has been imported here. Everything that is part of the compose navigation has been imported with this star. So I comment it out, and then I go back to that line. Yes, and this time I imported from the Accompanist library. As you can see, it is available both from Accompanist and Compose Navigation. I'm gonna select the first option. And also you can see that we have navigation that is needed, that needs to be replaced from navigation from the Accompanist library. This is a subgraph or sub-navigation for our navigation graph, and it is used for the more screen, of course, that has two other screens to which we can move. So I remove to do 3 because we have applied that to do. And then to do 4, replace navigation with navigation from the Accompanist library. As you can see, its complete package is com.google.accompanist navigation animation navigation. So I import navigation. It has two options for import, one from the Accompanist library and the other from the Jetpack Compose navigation. So I select the first option. Alright, I remove the to do. As you can see, I didn't make any specific and any abundant changes. As you can see, I didn't make many changes. I just replaced parts of my application with other components from the new library that I added. I also have here some part that needs to be imported. I have current backstack entry that needs to be imported. Yes, it was due to the commenting out that I performed earlier, and because main screen uses experimental APIs, it needs to add experimental animation annotation. Okay, as you can see, the changes that we made were not that much. We just replaced some components with other components with similar names from other packages from the Accompanist package. So we haven't defined any transitions yet. The next step is to add our transitions. If you run the application now, you won't see any changes and any specific transitions just yet. So to add the transitions, I start with my main navigation graph that is Animated Nav Host. So after the start transition, I add some other parameters. By pressing Ctrl Enter, by pressing Ctrl P, you can see the different components and different parameters that are available for this composable, like enter transition, exit transition, pop enter transition, and pop exit transition. So enter transition, so as you can see, enter transition has actually the signature that takes in two parameters. It takes two parameters, initial and target, both of which are nav backstack entries, and then it needs to return enter transition. Then we have exit transition, that is the transition that is run when we exit a screen. So enter transition was the transition that runs when we enter a screen, and the exit transition runs when we leave it. And exit transition is the transition that runs when we leave a screen. Pop enter transition is the transition that runs when we press the back button and then enter another screen. So, in fact, when you press the back button, you pop one item from your nav backstack, and therefore you enter a new screen that was already in the backstack, of course. So this is the enter transition for that screen. And the pop exit transition is the transition that runs for the screen that you leave when you press the back button. So when you by pressing the back button, actually you are popping one item from the nav backstack and you leave one current screen. So you will run an exit transition for that screen that you are leaving. Alright, let's continue with enter transition. I'm going to create an enter transition for it. It takes two parameters, initial and target. And for this needs to return an enter transition. There are different transition available for enter transition. For example, I'm going to run a slide transition. For enter transition, when I move to a new screen, I'm going to slide the screen from the right to the center. So slide horizontally, slide in horizontally. It has some parameters that I can customize, like initial offset X, that takes the full width, has its lambda parameter full width. I name it as width, and then I decide when to start its offset, what initial offset to use. I use 2 times the width because I wanted to enter the screen from the right, and then I can also specify the animation spec for it. So animation spec, the animation specification for it. I'm gonna use a simple tween animation with a duration of 1 second. I import tween. The next transition that I will use, I will specify is exit transition. Again, I pass in initial and target parameters. However, you notice that I'm not using them for now because I'm defining these enter and exit transitions for all the screens inside Animated Nav Host. So slide out horizontally. I use this function for transition, for sliding horizontally, and for exit transition. So the parameters that it has are target offset X. It takes a full width, and because I'm going to leave the screen from the left, the target offset is going to be -2 times width. Next we have pop enter transition and pop exit transition. But if you don't define them, pop enter and pop exit transitions will use the enter transition and exit transition that have been added by us. So if I run this application now, I will see that I have transitions for my screens when I enter a screen and leave a screen. In fact, when you navigate to a screen, you are both doing an exit transition and an exit and an enter transition. Before running the application, I'm going to add animation spec to be consistent with the other enter transition. I'm going to add the animation spec as tween with a duration of 1 second to my exit transition. I run the app. I'm by default in the home screen. I'm going to navigate to a new screen, to cart for example. Let's see if we have an exit transition for the home screen that we are leaving and an enter transition for the cart screen to which we are moving to. Yes, as you can see, we had an exit transition for home and an enter transition for cart. Then I navigate to favorites. Yes, as you can see, it is moving. And what about the more screen? We should have an exit transition for favorites and an enter transition for more. Yes. So what if we press the back button, which will return us to the home screen? The profile screen should be exited. So it needs to run an exit transition that by default it will use this exit transition because we haven't specified a value for pop and pop exit transition. And the new screen, home screen, will use enter transition. We will enter home screen with this transition. So I press the back button. As you can see, we entered the home screen with this enter transition by sliding in from the right. Alright, by only adding these two parameters, you can see that we were able to add simple transition to our Compose navigation application. And now the transitions between the screens are not simple anymore. At least we have a default transition for every navigation. However, transition is much more complicated than that. I mean, it has support for a lot of different scenarios. You can define different transitions for every composable in your navigation graph. Therefore, any screen can have different enter, exit, pop, enter, and pop, exit transition. And every subgraph or every sub navigation can also have its different transitions. It can have, for example, default transitions for enter, exit, pop, enter, and pop, exit. And beneath that, the composables that are part of that subgraph also can have their own transitions defined. So you can mix and match and have different and very, very customized transition for every screen to which you are navigating or from which you are navigating. So that's it for transition and for transition APIs in Compose navigation. In fact, as you saw, these transition APIs are not part of Compose navigation yet, but they will be added soon. I think in the future version of navigation library they will be added once these animation APIs become stable. But for now, we used the Accompanist library that is depending on experimental animation APIs and adds support for transition and animation to navigation. If you want to learn more about different enter and exit transitions and what functions are available for creating these types of transitions, you can open one of these functions and it will take you to a file, enter exit transition. This file's name, I think, the file's name is enter exit transition, and it has all the different functions that are defined for enter and exit transition. Fade in, slide in horizontally, slide in vertically, expand in horizontally, expand vertically, and these are the different enter transitions. And it also has different exit transitions: fade out, slide out horizontally, slide out vertically, shrink out, shrink horizontally, shrink vertically. They are very customizable and quite easy to use, so you can experiment with them and use them to your liking in your Jetpack Compose navigation application. So that's it for this video. I hope that you liked it and learned something useful. Thanks for watching.